Well, welcome to Round the Table with Christian Concern. It's great to be with you today, and I'm delighted to have a special guest, Beth Peltola, who is Chief Executive of the One Truth Project, joining us today on her specialist subject, Islam, and also Andrea Williams, Chief Executive of Christian Concern. And we are talking about terrorism. Been in the news, hasn't it? Terrorism, the Islam connection. We obviously had a attempted terrorist attack on Sunday, Remembrance Day, over in Liverpool. And if you read the newspaper headlines on Monday, my goodness, you'd have thought there was a Christian connection here, wouldn't you? They all said terrorist was a Christian convert on Monday morning. Andrea, what was your reaction to that when you saw that on Monday morning?
Well, to be honest, I was shocked. I was shocked that the front pages of the newspapers, I don't know whether it's even possible for the team supporting us today, if they can get images of those screenshots of those newspaper cuttings. But immediately the newspapers rushing to say that the perpetrator of this horrible crime was a Christian convert. And I thought, that's simply, I felt as if that would never have been said it would have never been said immediately in this way. This was an Islamic convert. This was an Islamist convert. It would always seem as if that kind of language is avoided when it comes to Islam. But how quickly and how easily it came for this man to be called a Christian convert, when in fact we've discovered, of course, that it's exactly the opposite. And I think that
We've got a picture there. Susapon was a Christian convert on the Telegraph on Monday.
To be honest, I'm offended at that. I'm offended at that because decent journalism would know immediately. Anybody who really understands Christianity, what Christianity is, would know that is as far from the truth as the East is from the West. It's wrong, plain wrong. It's brazen, it's shameful, it's sloppy journalism. That's what we saw in that kind of headline. And the truth is that no other group would put up with such a headline. No other group would put up with such a headline.
Well, yeah. And listen, if you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, do post your comments and questions. And what do you think about this subject? Very topical today. I'm going to go to Beth. Beth, what was your reaction to those news stories on Monday when you saw the headlines there?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked too, but what really struck me, it reminded me of how maybe about a decade ago when everyone was trying to lump all the religions together, and you still see that happening in society. I think in recent years, people have clocked there might be a difference between Islam and Christianity, but you still have large portions of society, and especially the media, who like to put us all in the same basket as if we're all the same. And also that claim you often hear in the last decade or 20 years, where if you look at wars, you look at violence, religion is to blame. So a lot of people want to blame religion. And this particular case of a Christian convert fed right into that idea that people want to try uphold. Finally, they have an example of someone who went to church for a time, and so now they can label that Christian. See, we also have Christian terrorists now. And so you can see that really feeds a narrative for those who want to make all religions look bad, all want to lump us all together as if we're all the same thing. And of course, we're very, very different.
And of course, it also plays into the huge religious illiteracy that we currently have in our society. It's not that people often talk about the sort of secular neutral square as if it really is neutral, when we know that the secular space is not a neutral space at all, and often punishes those certainly true Christians who cannot uphold a lot of what hard secular atheism pushes in the public square. Unless you conform to this, you will be punished. So that, I think, that's one of the things that it also shows, just a deep misunderstanding of what Christianity really is, just as the public space also misunderstands the true nature of Islam. And so there's a massive education lesson at large to be done within the nation, in journalism, and within a lot of our cultural bodies, those that actually direct the public discourse. There's a lot of religious illiteracy. So that is something that needs to be addressed. And of course it would be addressed if the church were truly vibrant and bold, and people really understood what Christianity was, and that it was speaking effectively to culture.
So Beth, I can see a comment here on YouTube, Cornerstone City, saying Jesus said, "You will know them by their fruit." And obviously, a fruit of Christianity is not suicide bombing. Hey, so no Christian would be expected to do that, or should be doing that.
It has never been suicide bombing, or it has never been murder and killing innocent people right from Genesis through to Revelation. God has never called his people to go out and murder. So we just need to be very clear on that. It isn't even just, say, the last 2,000 years of Christian living and biblical living. It's from the beginning, thou shalt not murder. And that's what we've seen happen today with this young man who, or this week, this young man who says, for at least a time, he was a Christian, although it looks like he wasn't at all.
So what about the asylum thing? Because, I mean, he had been trying to claim asylum. It was only after he had a failed attempt, like a rejection, that he actually went to Liverpool Cathedral and said he wanted to become a Christian. And what do you think is, how much are churches responsible for checking out these stories and seeing whether they're real and all of that kind of thing? Beth, you look like you want to comment on this.
Yeah, I do. I actually talked about this a few years ago, back in when I was in Europe. I was at a huge conference, Christian conference in Europe, and I was quite concerned about one of the church leaders there who was talking about a lot of so-called conversions out of Islam in their church. And I asked them, I said, how are you really checking that these are true converts? And after they are baptized or they're confirmed, are they staying with you in the church? Because that really is the key. And after they are given asylum, do they stay with you? Because that also is a clue into whether they are truly converted and truly following Christ. And her response was, she said, oh, well, that's not for me to judge. That's for the Holy Spirit to sort out. And I thought, hang on a minute, the Holy Spirit gives us a lot of wisdom. He's given us a lot of guidance all the way through the scriptures to know how to even tackle and grapple with opening our borders or closing our borders. And the Bible is actually talks a lot about people movements and how that should work. And so for her to sort of put it onto the Holy Spirit, that's for him to sort out. And I thought, well, as a church and as church leaders, we have a responsibility both to the Christian community and to the persecuted church and to society as a whole, including Muslims. And so we also have to be wise in how we actually judge those that are coming through who are claiming they want to become Christians. Surely we can have wisdom and how we vet that. I mean, we all vet that. If someone wants to become a church leader, there's a process that someone goes through to be able to be sure that this leader really loves Christ and wants to stand for the ways of Christ. At least that's how it should be. The same as those who are coming into the church. We want to open our churches for all people, but when someone wants to commit and then make a public commitment through baptism or through confirmation, then surely we must have a process to help that person one, be absolutely true, and also protect our communities, including cathedrals need to be doing that as well. So I think we have a responsibility to protect our congregations as well as be responsible to society as a whole, and just make sure that those that are wanting to be publicly acknowledged as Christians, that this is a true commitment. And it's easy to do that. I do know some church leaders who won't actually confirm or give baptisms until the person has asylum.
Really?
And might think,
I've not heard of that.
But yes, I have known 1 or 2 people who have done that. Or also what they have done, another church that I knew said that they would baptize them, they would also or confirm them, but they wouldn't give them a certificate because they knew that so many people were using it for immigration purposes. So they didn't give a certificate. They might have given a Bible, but they didn't give a certificate. So that's another way that some church leaders have also been able to check and see those that are really committed or not. And sometimes when they weren't committed, when they really were doing it just for immigration, people would leave and wouldn't get confirmed at that church because the leader wouldn't give them an actual certificate.
So I think there is a sense in which there's a micro issue in terms of really understanding whether the person has truly come to know and love the Lord Jesus Christ as their Lord and Saviour. So that's the hard work of gospel, that's the hard work of discipling and discipleship. There's also the church institution issue around this, the issue of certification. And I mean, one of the big questions I have, and it's almost as an aside in this conversation, but we're talking about the cathedral in Liverpool. It's the Bishop of Liverpool, Paul Bayes, who is a leading LGBTQI campaigner in the Church of England and in the culture. So he is someone who is in many ways dismantling the truth, the absolute gospel truth on the one hand. And evidently there was this course with certificates at the end that was happening in and through Liverpool Cathedral. And there's that says something about what we're tolerating or what our understanding of the gospel is. I want to make that as almost as a bit of an aside for the point I'm making right now, because the other thing I want to say within our legal centre is this, that we know that the immigration system heavily dominated by Muslims. So those that are actually making the checks and the giving the permissions, many of the officials are now Muslims. And so what we often see is true believers, and what we see at the Christian Legal Centre is true believers not getting through the system. And actually.
And one of those is Reza Khan, isn't he? Maybe our friends can put the link up on about his case. But yeah, he is engaging actively in outreach to Muslims in his own community and in church every week, translating, radiates with enthusiasm for Jesus and the gospel.
Well, he talks also, Tim, doesn't he, about the way in which the interpreters within the immigration system often do not interpret properly for Christians. So that they will fail. So you've also got that issue. So I mean that's a sort of endemic problem that we have, and it's about the truthfulness of what's going on here. Of course, that's something that we're surely not going to resolve or solve on this round table. But it's a really
But there's another aspect to this, Andrea, which is, I mean, we don't know his heart, right? He may have actually genuinely become a Christian. Certainly he deceived, if it was a deception. The people who were with him and discipling him believed that he was moved by Jesus and was praying genuine prayers and all of that kind of thing. So it may have been genuine or it may have been a deception. We don't know at this point. But what about this point about Takiyah, Beth? Can you tell us about that? Because some people are saying, in fact, the head of the armed forces, I think, said it could be Takiyah. Tell us about that, Beth.
Yeah, I was quite surprised to see someone so high up in authority actually say that. But yes, I mean, Takiyah has always existed in Islam. Some people say it only really exists in Shia Islam, so that would be your Iranians and Syrians, which it sounds like this bomber might have come from that part of the world. But nevertheless, there is an idea of that in Islamic law. I've got Islamic law books on the bookshelf behind me, and if you read in the Islamic law, that which is translated English, if you're an English speaker, you will see how there seems to be an element of deception in order for either a Muslim to preserve their life or to progress Islam. And that's the idea behind Takiyah. You will have quite a few modernist Muslims or feminist Muslims who don't like that idea at all. And they would prefer to bring in a sort of form of interpretation called ijtihad, which is a sort of reinterpreting Islam for the modern times. And that would be, of course, rejecting theological ideas like Takiyah. So you have a lot of modernist Muslims who would be influencing, say, the British government and advising the British government, who would say there's no such thing as that, or we don't use that today. The problem is that they're going up against their traditions and going up against the texts of Islam. And Islamic law, of course, deeply influences many, many Muslims around the world and the way Muslims live out their lives. And for many Muslims to know how to live up their life, they have to go to Islamic law or Islamic experts. And so there is this idea of immigration. There is this idea of, a mass movement of Muslims moving from one country to another and bringing in different elements, using Takiyah if it would preserve their life or would preserve Islam, or in
under Takiyah, this deception doctrine, Beth, just to be clear about this, it's acceptable for a Muslim to pretend to convert to be a Christian, is it?
Well, it doesn't necessarily specifically say what a Muslim can do, but certainly there would be allowance, yes, for a Muslim to lie or to mislead people. So that, and one of those would be to become a Muslim in order to get close to either
become a Christian,
be given something they need, or get close to Christianity. And if it turns out this young man did Takiyah, which we're not sure, maybe he just it sounds like he had mental health issues. I just want to be very clear. He may well have had mental health issues, but we need to be very careful in society that not every bomber has mental health issues. Some of them are very clear thinkers, and they're just being deeply Islamic, according to the Quran and according to the life of Muhammad. So just to make that very clear from the outset. But whether this young man was doing Takiyah or not, the fact is, yes, he can sort of pull the wool over our eyes and pretend he's something that he isn't, if that's what he was implementing.
And Beth and Tim, I just want to say here, as someone, you are both experts in Islam, but this concept of Takiyah is one which I think that most folk don't really have any idea of. And you're right, Beth, to hear someone so senior actually speaking that into the into the public discourse, that the perpetrator here, this young man, may well have been acting under Takiyah, under that doctrine. As it were, is, I think, something that we really do need people to understand, that this is permissible in Islam for an Islamic purpose. I mean, I don't know. I think that Beth has just unpacked that, but I wonder, Tim, if you want to say anything more with regard to that.
Well, I mean, I think people don't realise largely that this is an Islamic practice and doctrine, and it's it is interesting that the such a senior member of the security services agreed with that point and recognises it, but it does make it very deceptive to know what Muslims are doing and saying if they're open or willing to deceive. They have this doctrine of deception called Takiyah, which enables them to deceive people about their motives and about what they're doing. And the other interesting point about this is that Islamic State has actually previously recommended that people pretend to be Christians, wear crosses and things like that, in order to carry out their deeds. So it's kind of been endorsed in that way, at least by Islamic State teaching, which is obviously, makes it very difficult to discern around this whole kind of thing. But what about, Beth, terrorism and Islam? Okay, it's got nothing to do with Islam, has it, Beth? What do you say to that?
I find that very bizarre when I hear that claim, when there's a terrorist attack and everyone stands up and say, this has nothing to do with Islam. Or people say it's just a tiny, tiny minority of Muslims would support some form of jihad or terrorist act in the name of Islam. The problem is then they are teaching against their own Quran. So you have verses like Surah 8:12, Surah 351, where it actually encourages people not only to do violence, it says to cast terror into the hearts of unbelievers. The idea is you cast terror into the hearts of unbelievers, those who are against Allah, Islam, or Muhammad. So it's clear. It's talking about terrorism. It's not even just saying go murder people or go, and that's not just, but it's not just go kill people. It is actually strike terror into the hearts of unbelievers, on those who are enemies of Islam. You see that clearly in the Quran multiple times, and you also see, so for example, in Surah 5, verse 33, a very clear edict where Muslims are called upon to fight and kill, to maim and crucify those who are enemies of Islam or those who cause mischief in the land. And that would be anyone who would stand against Muhammad, would stand against Allah, would stand against Islam.
Hang on a minute, Beth. Hang on a minute. Didn't it say just there that you shouldn't, if you take one person's life, it's as if you take everybody's life?
So in 532, yes, that's the most misquoted verse in the whole Quran, I think, in the Western world. And it's probably about one of the only verses that a lot of politicians know. And so when there's a terrorist act, everyone will come out with that verse because they've been told probably by those who are advising them in Surah 5:32 that it says that if you take a life, it's like you took the life of all. And if you save a life, it's like you saved the life of all. However, that verse says to the Jews or to the people of the book, Allah basically has ordained. So to the Jews, to the people of the book, or to the Jews specifically, it says that Allah has ordained that if you take a life, it's as if you take the life of all. And then the very next verse is then to go and to basically kill those who are cause mischief in the land and who are enemies of Islam. So the next verse is not talking to Jews anymore. It's talking to those who want to protect Islam and defend Islam. So that first verse, Surah 5:32, is talking to Jews, and the next verse is talking to Muslims to go and fight and maim anyone who is an enemy of Islam. So yeah, we need to make sure we're reading those verses together.
Well, there's that. So it's understanding actually how the verses are quoted and how it's defended again, because what you've got is religious illiteracy. People hear things. What you've got continually stated in the national noise, in the international Western noise is Islam is a religion of peace. So there's a fear and a horror. So you can't say Islam. You can't say Islamic terrorism. This is the whole point about, they went straight to Christian terrorists, but we can't really put Islamic and terrorism in the same sentence. Certainly not on the front page of a newspaper. I'm not saying it doesn't happen at all, because of course it does, but it's just people are much more fearful about doing that. Yeah. Then you've got the defense you've got the political defense of Islam with the kind of misquoting of the verses as Beth has just outlined. But then you've got, but what about the Crusades? And what about the Old Testament, Tim? The other point is, what about the Old Testament? You say this is just Muslims corrupting the Quran. This is because most Muslims are very, and of course we want to really love our Muslim neighbor. We absolutely want to love our Muslim neighbors and friends, but they will say the truth is that there's a few crazy terrorist Christians and a few crazy terrorist Muslims, and Christians defend the Christians defend their actions. Look at what happened in the Old Testament. Right.
So, well, we should talk about that. But I see that my friends have posted my article, "Is Islam a Religion of Peace?" Up in the comments there. If you're listening, do Google that. It covers all of these verses and all of these points in some more detail than we can cover in a conversation. But Beth, I'm going to go to you on the Old Testament. What do you say when people say the Old Testament justifies terrorism?
Yeah, I will address the Old Testament very quickly. Anyone who says Islam is a religion of peace, 2 books to go to the biography of Muhammad. And you can get this anyway. Get on the internet, Life of Muhammad by Alfred Guillaume. It's a bit of a chore to get through, but it definitely shows that Muhammad was not a peaceful man. And the Quran says that if you are a Muslim, that obedient Muslims are to obey Muhammad and Allah. And then go to the Quran, where there's over 150 verses that are direct edicts from Allah telling Muslims to kill in the name of Islam. Some might be for an older context, but a lot of them are just direct edicts even for today. I haven't got time to unpack that, but that's basically the answer to that. When anyone says Islam's a religion of peace, go to the biography.
Your answer is read the text. Fair enough.
Yeah, go to the text. Looking at the Crusades and also the Old Testament, we teach a lot about this on our course on the One Truth Project. We have a course on Islam, a biblical response to Islam.
It's a great course. Really good course.
One of the big topics we tackle is the Old Testament and is Crusades and church history, because of course it was in church history where Islam, some Middle Ages, where Islam really came to power and was engaging with Christians all the way through. And what a lot of people forget about the Crusades, and I'm not excusing everything that happened in the Crusades. Crusades was war. War is a horrific thing. But we need to reclaim Crusades back from the very secular vision that we've been given in the last sort of few decades from the academic, from education and so on, who have interpreted the Crusades in such a negative light, and have ennobled the Muslims that they were fighting against, as if the Muslims are noble, and the sultans were noble and they were sophisticated, and we got lots of our arts and sciences and architecture from Islam and so on. And then they compare that to the medieval Christianity as if it was cruel and terrible. Well, we need to reclaim, first of all, church history back to its rightful place, and the Crusades. The Crusades were a pushback after 400 years of Islamic invasions, Muslim forces coming in, primarily, first of all, from Arabia through North Africa, destroying the church in North Africa, taking the women and children as sex slaves and the men as warriors. Those same warriors were brought into southern Spain to conquer southern Spain. You see the same happening going as far over as to China. And so you have the Islamic forces, usually slaves, coming in and are trying to conquer parts of Christian Europe. And so you have the beginning of what is called the Reconquista, and this happened for 400 years of European Christians trying to protect their families. Sometimes they were villages, sometimes their towns, and sometimes they were leaders, trying to protect their communities, their churches, and so on. Churches were destroyed, and then that architecture and those churches were then used to rebuild or build beautiful mosques and beautiful forts like the Fort of Cordoba in Spain. And so you have this movement of Muslims continually, brutally. You need to read Morera's book on the myth of the Andalusian paradise, one of the best books I've ever written on the topic. And it really exposes the cruelty of the Muslim leaders right across Islamic Spain and going into France, and what it did to the Christians and even to the pagans and so on. And why you have the Reconquista pushing back, trying to protect their lands, finally leading to the Crusades. And what else is interesting in those Crusades, especially the former Crusades that were brought about by the popes and also the leaders of the lands, those Crusades, when they conquered some of the areas that had been taken primarily by Muslim invaders, when the Crusaders set up their citadel kingdoms in the Holy Land, different parts of the world, you actually have both Jews, Christians, and Muslims running to those citadel kingdoms for protection. Now, nobody talks about these things. Why would Muslims run to Christian kingdoms for protection? Yeah. So we need to look at the Crusades in a very different light to what we've been taught. We're not excusing atrocities done on both sides, but we need to be a little bit more intelligent and looking at the Crusades, that they were pushing back against the 400 years of invasions of right through Africa, Europe, and parts of the Holy Land. And further
so Beth, Rachel Elizabeth on Facebook says, please can you share details of the books mentioned and where to find the One Truth Project? So that's The Myth of Andalusian Paradise, isn't it? It's a very good book, actually. Who's it by again? Oh, it's a Spanish guy, isn't it?
Yes, he knows fluent Spanish, Arabic, French. So he's reading the original eyewitness testimonies from the one most of us can't read because we don't know the languages. So he's then brought it all into English and translated it into English for us to be able to read. And it's eyewitness accounts, both Muslim and Christian. And
how do people get onto your course, Beth?
They can go to www.onetruthproject.org. And if you look at online courses and they look at the course on Islam, a biblical response to Islam, that's our flagship course that people can do. We're also going to do short versions, and we're developing short courses on different topics like the Crusades and so on.
Brilliant. And but what you haven't addressed still is the Old Testament.
Old Testament, right? Same thing. Yes. Basically, Old Testament. So I love the book of Samuel. In the book of Samuel, you'll have there's a situation there where Jesus is the king. And Jesus has been guiding the people when they came out of Egypt, out of slavery into freedom. And he's been guiding the people to a land of freedom and life and so on. And Jesus has always been king. And then suddenly in Samuel, you have the people, they do not want Jesus to be king anymore. They say, we want a human king. And that's when you have Saul and the beginning of human kings. And in some sense, human politics start in the book of Samuel. And so you have then human kings put into replace Jesus, and Jesus warns the people, you will have taxes, you will have all sorts of issues that will happen to you because you're choosing human kings over above the way of Christ. So Christ has always been leading them.
You need to go before that, because what about what happened to the judges, right?
Yes, yes, but Christ has always been leading, and he is called the warrior of heaven. He does bring judgment and justice on all peoples. And what's interesting, he will also judge his own people. So when the people who were called his people had strayed and become horrific in their behavior, they too were judged, which is very, very different to Islam. So you do have moments of judgment in the Old Testament. What people tend to do is they'll pick up one verse here and there as if that describes the whole of the Bible, not realizing there's hundreds of years sometimes between the wars that happen in the Old Testament. And you'll see that God's morality is equal for all people. He doesn't say, well, for my people, you can get away and do bad stuff. Yeah, you can go kill, but over there, let's go hurt them. No, he holds all people to the same level of morality. Yes. Which is he's consistent. You don't see that with Islam at all. And also you see the reason for some of the judgment in the Old Testament is when murder, when acts like terrorism, when absolute debauchery and abuse of children and women and so on have become so out of control, God's like, right, enough's enough. Much like we do today through our justice systems today. Enough's enough.
Yeah.
So if we
all the commands of balance are time specific, aren't they? They're for this particular situation, this particular time, and they've never been used by Jews or Christians ever since to justify violence going forward in the name of Christianity or Islam in the same kind of way. So whereas in the Quran, they're open-ended, aren't they?
It's ongoing, yes. Yeah. And we're not called. Jesus says, though, to turn away from the sword, and we're not called to use the sword. Muslims today are called to use the sword.
Well, there's an obvious contrast between Jesus and Muhammad in that, isn't there? Yeah. Because Muhammad did lead wars and did fight and did kill people, and
Jesus sacrificed himself. I mean, what a story and what a contrast that he would shed his own blood for our sin to pay the penalty that we deserved.
Yeah.
And God the Father sent his son, his beloved son, to pay that penalty.
Yeah.
And for Jesus himself, so pure, not wanting, actually understanding what the cost would be.
Yeah.
And pleading even at one point, because he knew where he would have to go, take this cup from me, but not my will, but yours, O Lord. And then he submitted himself willingly. To be that beautiful sacrifice. Well, that is such a contrast that his, and again, it was a false trial put to death by the religious men and the legal system to put to death by the leaders of the age, the system with a baying mob. So that is such a contrast.
So I just want to move on to the question of lone wolves, though. Beth, because in case people listening didn't realize, it has now been revealed that this chap in Liverpool was attending mosque all day every day during Ramadan and more recently as well. So he's and people say he's a lone wolf, but there's obviously influence there, isn't there, Beth? There's obviously influence, and he's finding teaching from somewhere, and it seems like it must have been from the mosque that he attended that is radicalizing him in this way, is it not, Beth? How do you view this?
The term lone wolf has been used to distract people away from the real problem, as you said, Tim. What is empowering lone wolves? Well, their text, the life of Muhammad and the Quran, that's what's empowering lone wolves. If you look at one of the stories, actually in the biography of Muhammad, you have a story where you have a mother. She's with her child, she's feeding her child, and this lone wolf goes out and he kills her in front of her children. It's a brutal story. It's in the life of Muhammad. And he comes back to Muhammad and he's like, oh, should I tell Muhammad what I've done? And he does. And Muhammad is very pleased with what he's done and says that this kind of man is a good Muslim. Now, he was, in a sense, a lone wolf. Because he was had watched what his prophet had been doing according to the Islamic text, and he felt that that was the right thing to preserve the honor of Muhammad. This mother had just been writing poetic verse against Muhammad and his men because they had killed a lot of her relatives. So she got killed because of it. Now that's a lone wolf. So we need to be very careful we're not distracted from the real cause that's empowering such lone wolves to do what they do, because they are.
The other thing, Beth, is, I don't know if you read my review of Ed Hussein's book, Among the Mosques, but he went and visited the mosques up and down the country, Bradford, Birmingham, Dewsbury, London, Manchester. Every mosque he found extremist teaching, every mosque. And literature that is banned in Saudi Arabia is available in the mosques in this country. So it's not hard for people to go and find and become radical and find radical teaching here in the mosques in this country. That's sort of the point, isn't it, really?
And you also have the contagion principle, don't you? So if the lone wolf is actually doing that which promotes Islam and is in line with the teaching of Islam for the good of Islam, which is what these actions are seen as, according to the teaching, and then that is known. So when other similar acts get done, well, that's all part of a continuum, really. It's not because of the teaching that's in the mosques.
Yeah. So Beth, what can we do about all this? What do you think we need to do as the church in response to these kind of things? Now we've had 2 Islamic terrorist attacks in the last month. One was an MP brutally murdered in a church in his own constituency, and the other was this latest suicide bombing in Liverpool. Terrorism threat levels been raised. What do you think we should do, Beth?
Yeah, for the sake of the church and for the sake of society, including refugees who have genuinely come here for sanctuary, which we support, for them as well and for the church has to have a very clear response and needs to become that, in some sense, the fortress it used to be, the citadel that people would run to and go to and be truly transformed. We can't point fingers at those that have had Muslim friends or Muslims come to their congregation, either pretend to be Muslims and then not actually go the whole way as following Christ. We can't necessarily point the fingers at that, because we've all had friends. I've had Muslim friends who were coming really close to Christ and then decided to walk away from him. And then, of course, the consequences of that can be anything. So, but what we do is the church needs to have a response, and the church needs to start being a lot more seen. It needs to have a very clear message. When I say the church, I'm talking about, let's talk about every denomination here. We need to really clearly preach Christ. And those that are a part of us, our congregations, are showing Christ, and we need to be wise in how we work with and welcome everyone in. But let's be what the church is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a place where everyone is welcome, but they clearly see Christ, not a compromise, not a watered down faith.
And that's it, isn't it? I mean, that's really it. We have to have the confidence in the gospel to change and transform the lives of those that come into it. So we believe that Jesus Christ can rescue, change, and transform every Muslim, every immigrant that comes into this country. We believe that. We ought not to have policies in place whereby, in holding hotels, in holding asylum centres, we are giving to those that are coming in Qurans and prayer mats. Rather, we should be giving them the Bible. That's the kind of thing we need to have confidence in, that if we give the Bible to those people that are coming in, that they will read it and they will be transformed by the living word of God. Do we have that confidence? We need to love those that are enslaved to what is a false religion, to what is against God's truth. We need to love them so much to have the courage to commit to them for the sake of the gospel. Then I pray that we will see change. We need to have hearts that are full of love for the Muslims, but we also need to understand what Islam is and where it will drive those that live amongst us, those that are going to the mosques. What we need to understand the teaching that's happening in the mosques.
Well, but Beth, you and I have written a book on this very subject to help the church, haven't we?
Yes.
called Questions to Ask Your Muslim Friends, which is exactly trying to empower Christians to engage with Muslims on the questions of faith, and really sort of starting very simple questions like how do you become a Muslim and things like that, then moving on to comparing Jesus and Muhammad, which is always a good strategy in talking with Muslims, and then going into some more depth about the Quran and issues and teachings you can challenge in the Quran and stuff. We hope to bring that out early next year. So watch this space for that. But I think that a big thing is the church needs to be equipped to confidently challenge Islam and confidently.
Let's face it, Tim, government and society hasn't found a solution, and it can't. It has no response to a religion like Islam, but only uniquely can Christ and those who are truly Christians have an actual response to Islam, because we believe in passionately following the Lord Jesus. We understand in some sense the psyche of a terrorist in that they passionately follow Muhammad and their Quran. We get that as Christians. So let's bring them home to Jesus, who teaches them not to kill and maim others, but to love others. And
I want to ask Beth, are we as passionate as them? I mean, are we really? Are we really in this nation? You know, if we were as passionate, we would be out on the streets proclaiming Jesus Christ as the answer in this broken world. If ever you could see right now in our nation, a nation that is hurting and lost, and the rise of radical Islam amongst the Muslim demographic in our nation, that is a moment when we should, be absolutely passionate, believing that it's the gospel of Jesus Christ that can change and transform. And I look at them and know, as you've just said, Beth, that only Jesus is the answer to this. Yeah. But it's as if we, as a collective people, have lost our confidence in the power of the gospel. And I think we need to find it. We need to find it fast.
Yeah. Yes, we do. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, look, I think that's been a really great discussion. Thank you so much for joining us, Beth, in particular, and down there as well. I hope you found that helpful, and do follow up on the various links and books and resources that we've pointed to there, and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and sign up for our emails as well. And we'll look forward to talking again next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.